This video is brought to you by Ground News. More than 600 days into the war in Gaza, and it's hard not to notice the rising chorus of international condemnation of the Israeli government over the past few weeks. Even Israel's stauncher Western allies and others usually reluctant to condemn the country's actions have sharpened their tone, with a host of Western countries announcing fresh sanctions against Israeli ministers Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich on Tuesday. So in this video, we're going to take a look at this new wave of condemnation and explore the key question that it raises. Will any of this actually make Israel change course? Who is the most influential person in the world? Well, with your help, we've put together a full ranking. Learn the top 10 in the video linked below, or pick up a copy of our magazine for the full list. So, where is this new wave of criticism coming from, and what's been said? Perhaps the most notable example of this came from Germany, one of Israel's closest European backers, whose Chancellor Friedrich Merz said of Israel last month that to harm the civilian population to such an extent, as has increasingly been the case in recent days, can no longer be justified as a fight against Hamas terrorism. Similarly, the Italian government, previously a vocal supporter of Israel, recently intervened, saying Netanyahu must halt the raids on Gaza, and that Israel's, quote, legitimate reaction to the Hamas attack was, quote, unfortunately taking absolutely dramatic and unacceptable forms. The German and Italian comments followed a joint statement by the UK, France and Canada, which denounced the Israeli military escalation as wholly disproportionate, described Israeli ministerial language as abhorrent, and said the provision of aid was wholly inadequate, while threatening to take further concrete actions in response. France, whose President Macron has stepped up his criticism of the Israeli government, is also separately organising a conference this month with Saudi Arabia, which may see France, and perhaps other Western countries, recognise Palestine. Even US President Donald Trump appears to be getting frustrated with Israel's continuation of the war, having recently said, "We've been talking to them and we want to see if we can stop that whole situation as quickly as possible," and acknowledging that, quote, "a lot of people are starving in Gaza." More recently, Trump seemed to cast doubt on the prudence of Israel's decision to seize the Madeleine flotilla, telling reporters in the White House, "I think Israel has enough problems without kidnapping Greta Thunberg." So what's driving this sharpening of rhetoric among Israel's nominal allies? Well, as we see it, there are three broad reasons. The first is the continuation of the war in Gaza, after the ceasefire collapsed in March, and Israel relaunched an intensified military operation in the Strip that has since killed more than 4,000 Palestinians. The second is humanitarian aid, or rather the lack of it. Beginning in early March, for 11 weeks, Israel blocked all deliveries of food, medicines, fuel and aid from entering the Gaza Strip, driving the territory's population towards famine and exacerbating the human catastrophe. Even now that this blockade has partially been lifted, the UN has warned that the amount of aid Israel is permitting to enter Gaza is still only a fraction of what is needed. On top of this, Israel has set up its own aid distribution system, using a US-backed group and private American security contractors, with the goal of bypassing the established UN-led system. The new system has been condemned by the UN, other humanitarian organizations, and foreign governments as a weaponization of aid, a violation of humanitarian principles, and dangerously inadequate at distributing what is necessary, a concern that's been borne out by a string of incidents including stampedes and near-daily shootings, allegedly by Israeli forces and allied gunmen, that have reportedly killed at least 163 Palestinians trying to collect aid. And our third factor driving international pressure is the extreme rhetoric coming from the Israeli government. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has made clear that one of the aims of the recently intensified Gaza operation is to take control of the whole Strip, while influential far-right ministers like Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir talk of total destruction, Israeli occupation, emigration of the Palestinian population from Gaza, and the construction of Jewish settlements. In the West Bank, meanwhile, the Israeli government just announced the creation of 22 new settlements in the occupied territory, which are considered illegal under international law. Finance Minister Smotrich explicitly said it was, quote, a strategic move that prevents the establishment of a Palestinian state. You could probably also make the case that the growing condemnation is, at least partly, national governments catching up with public opinion. Pew Research from earlier this year shows widespread unfavourable views of Israel across 24 countries surveyed. But has there actually been any action to accompany this rhetorical change? Well, in some ways and from some countries, yes. The EU, for example, is reviewing its trade and cooperation agreement with Israel after 17 of its 27 member states backed the move. The UK suspended trade agreement negotiations with Israel in response to its aid restrictions and has imposed sanctions on several West Bank settlers and entities. Then, just this week, the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand and Norway announced sanctions and travel bans on Israeli Minister Smotrich and National Security Minister Ben-Gvir for, quote, inciting violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. Now, it's worth pointing out that the actions we've mentioned so far are by no means the limit of what governments could do, should they decide to go further. The UK, for example, has only partially suspended arms exports to Israel, and despite Merz's recent criticism of Israeli action, Germany, the world's second largest supplier of arms to Israel, says it will continue to provide Israel with weapons. Germany is also one of many European countries that has been non-committal when asked if they would enforce the ICC arrest warrant against Benjamin Netanyahu. As for the EU's review of its association agreement with Israel, it is all but guaranteed that there will not be the requisite unanimity among member states to suspend the whole agreement. But some more targeted measures, like revoking preferential trade access or suspending Israeli participation in the Horizon Europe research programme, would only require a qualified majority. But will any of this actually change Israeli policy? Well, without straying into a debate about the symbolic, moral, or longer-term justifications for the aforementioned actions, in practical terms, it doesn't look likely that the Israeli government will meaningfully change its course anytime soon as a result of the recent escalation in international pressure. The Netanyahu government clearly doesn't care what the international community thinks, and even if European governments were to suspend all arms sales, Israel has enough weapons to continue its assault. Ultimately, the elephant in the room is the United States, Israel's largest diplomatic ally, arms supplier and trade partner, and as such, probably the only country with sufficient leverage over Israel and Netanyahu. Despite Trump's apparent frustration at being unable to secure a ceasefire in Gaza and reports of a rift between him and Netanyahu, so far there has been no hint that Trump will take any concrete action to force Israel's hand. Military support continues to flow, and the US continues to provide Israel with diplomatic cover, just last week having vetoed a UN Security Council resolution that demanded an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire in Gaza. If you want to know more about this topic, there's plenty of other outlets reporting about it online. Unfortunately though, it's sometimes hard to tell exactly which way these outlets lean politically, making it difficult to understand exactly how your view of world events is being biased by the sources you're reading. That's where this week's sponsor, Ground News, comes in. Their website and app, developed by a former NASA engineer, allows us to pull back the curtain on media bias and have a look at exactly how each story is being covered. For instance, this story about the UK, Canada and others imposing sanctions on 2 Israeli ministers has been covered by 341 different sources. We know that around 73 of these have been reported by the left, and 47 of these have been reported by the right. That's not all though. Ground News has tons of genuinely useful features. Take their blind spots feed, for instance. This shows you the stories underreported by one side of the political spectrum or the other. For example, if you lean left, you probably missed this story on US and Chinese officials agreeing on a plan to ramp down trade tensions. Here at TLDR News, we think that Ground News is an incredibly useful tool for our current media landscape, one that's constantly trying to attract your attention and sway you towards or away from certain political viewpoints. So having a tool that helps you spot this and helps you take action really is a game changer. If you're interested in everything Ground News has to offer, you can get 40% off the Unlimited Access Vantage Plan subscription by using the link in the description or scanning the QR code on screen. This limited time offer is only available here, so make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.